Welcome back. The Independent Police Investigative Directorate's report into the theft of foreign currency from President Cyril Ramaphosa's Phala Phala farm has been declassified, but the public won't have direct access to it. Acting Police Minister Firoz Cachalia confirmed that the probe into the conduct of officers handling the case has been completed. Access will only be granted through formal legal channels under the Promotion of Access to Information Act. Several people are currently in court for the 2020 theft of $580,000 in cash for what is claimed to be the proceeds from the sale of Ankole cattle. Now, for more reaction on the story, we are joined by uMkhonto Sizwe Party spokesperson Nhlamulo Ndhlela. Nhlamulo, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Just talk to us with regards to the ANC's, or rather the MK Party's, reaction with regards to this now being declassified but still not being made public for the rest of the country to have access to.
Good evening to yourself and good evening to your viewers. We see this as a further attack on democracy and a further cover-up on the existential rot within the law enforcement agencies and specifically the police. You know, this matter has been ongoing since IPID then concluded a report in around the 2023 October, give or take. And MK Party came out, and this is even before the emergence of MK Party. In 2025, we already called for the declassification of this report by IPID. And we further then said that, firstly, we want to understand why was this report classified by the Minister of Police at the time, Newzroom, who himself is a rogue individual, has also been found embroiled in all these activities, as you would have seen with the press briefing that was given by Lieutenant General Konazi. We're saying that, there's a case to be heard here. Remember, the Section 89 report by the then Justice clearly outlined that there's a case to be heard here. But ever since then, the president has been, quite honestly, obstructing justice and has been a fugitive from justice because he's never had his day in court, even though he has accepted that indeed there is monies that were paid to him, in a form of cash, which is not legal tender. And these are the issues that we believe are in that report that they're trying to cover. Firstly, we need to understand, which we believe is in this report, how did this aircraft land in South Africa? What is the tail number of this aircraft? Who was in that aircraft? And how was this deal negotiated and discussed? Let alone the fact that SARS need to then also come back and tell us, how was this money, processed? Was it actually declared with SARS? Because, doing a transaction during COVID, by the way, and then saying that it was a legitimate transaction, there is no corruption, and yet you can't show any confirmation from SARS, you can't show any information of how this aircraft landed, because we were told that this person came in with a private jet, is truly, truly questionable. So we're just seeing that, the president in this case, who's supposed to be held accountable and still loitering in the union buildings, has still not been held accountable. And this is the biggest problem that we have. And we're calling that the police minister, in this case, our chief whip, has also written to the minister requesting a certain number of matters that should be made public, i.e., what processes, for instance, did you follow to classify and declassify? South Africans have to know what transpired here. And we owe it to South Africans, the president and the GNU owe it to South Africans to ensure that this happens. What's also glaring is that, if you recall, the DA was very central, even before the emergence of MK, in ensuring, and they were very loud about it, saying that the president needs to be held accountable. But they've gone totally quiet. Now, that just tells you that there is no moral ground, that the DA is complicit in all of this, because they themselves are not saying anything about this, and they've never even questioned as to whether the president should be held accountable, let alone see his day in court. And let's also forget that We've been waiting for a judgment from the Constitutional Court, which is not forthcoming. And that itself is also just nothing more than a delay of justice. And we have called that that report must be made public because we believe that it implicates the president and that the president actually ought to be in jail sharing a cell with his friend uMkhonto.
So in that, and believing that this needs to be made public, the MK Party is planning to submit a Promotion of Access to Information Act application in order to force the release of this report. Just explain to us in terms of the process that you're looking to take in order to ensure that this is then made public.
Look, I mean, I think the first thing, as I said, is that we need to follow a process, and due process says that we write to the minister and we request that he answers the questions that we've listed in the letter. We've shared the letter. And how did they come about classifying this document? Why did they classify it if it's of public interest? Remember, IPID and any information related to the state in certain instances such as this ought to be made public for South Africans. IPID, that's why we've called that IPID should be reporting to Parliament. And in that way, we can hold the executive to account. As it is, you see now the police meddling in processes because of political influence, only to shelve what is a very serious matter of the president being implicated in corruption. Since when have you ever seen in any country that is not a banana republic, because this is what he has now turned this country to be, a banana republic where you can just run away and use the state apparatus to cover up your political agenda and your activities. And this has been ongoing for too long. South Africans need answers, and this is the time that the minister must demonstrate that he's apolitical, he's not driving a political agenda, and that they must ensure that this report is made public. And that's what the MK Party is calling on. And we're going to continue to ensure that we hold this executive accountable by ensuring that that report is made public.
And what do you say to those who argue that the national security or ongoing investigations justify the secrecy of such a report?
What elements of national security are we talking about? When, in actual fact, the president himself has said that this was a transaction. So let's look at the following. You come and you do a transaction. If any of us as normal citizens or any other citizen was found with that amount of cash, that's not legal tender in a form of dollars, you'd be arrested. So why are we even arguing this point? This is a case of criminality, and the president is incriminated in criminality, but he's never had his day in court. So we're saying that there's nothing to hide here. South Africans already know the truth. What South Africans need to see now are the details of exactly how corrupt this president is. More so also the GNU and his protectors, the DA.
So with that said, if this report is then released fully and transparently, what impact do you believe that this would have on the political landscape in South Africa?
Well, the South African public will then realize that the so-called New Dawn was nothing more than just a scam, because it is rooted with corruption, political interference, everything that has been exposed by Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, that the president actually works in this case in tandem with criminality and criminals and underground criminals. In this case, is someone that coming from a country this is someone outside the country of South Africa, which clearly means that his network extends outside of this country. So we need to ensure that there's transparency. Justice must not have any eyes. Parity in application of the law must be applied equally, and therefore the president must be held accountable instead of loitering in the union buildings and masquerading as a president who is against criminality and corruption, when he himself, clearly from what we're seeing, is corrupt to the core.
And the consequences, the potential consequences, if this report remains hidden or heavily redacted, what do you think that would cause in the long term?
Well, firstly, there is no public trust in the judiciary, in the public, in the police, as well as the police and the law enforcement agencies throughout the country. So this will just further demonstrate that this president is nothing more but a sham, and that he's a criminal that should be arrested. And we're going to call for his arrest as soon as that report is made public. And he knows this. And that's why they're running helter-skelter to try and find all sorts of ways to, run away from accountability. And we're saying that as MK Party, we're not going to allow that. We're going to, obviously, as we've said in our letter, activate the PAIA, and that we should have access to that report, and that he should be held accountable and be arrested. If there's any South African that was ever found with that amount of cash, that is not of legal tender, that person would be going to jail. Why can't the president go and also face his music in court? Instead, under the current administration, President Ramaphosa, or Mr. Ramaphosa, we should call him, has actually captured the judiciary, and he's weaponized the judiciary. He's weaponized the enforcement agencies for his own gain. And that's how he's now able to negotiate a pact with himself and the DA and keeping them quiet. That's why you'll never hear the DA say anything, because they themselves were more interested in blue lights and governing, and as you've seen, taking trips with boyfriends overseas for their own benefit, as opposed to serving the country. And this is what this country has become, a banana republic under the guise of a so-called new dawn, of which, quite honestly, is nothing else but a sham of criminality and corrupt individuals who are now governing this country.
All right. National spokesperson of the MK Party, Nhlamulo Ndhlela, thank you for your time and giving us your reactions with regards to the IPID's report on the Phala Phala farm, which has now been declassified but not yet been made public for the rest of the public. When we return, we'll bring you more of our top stories, so do stay with us. We'll be back after this.